I would like to just go through very quickly how the next little bit is going to go. There are a series of questions that we will be going through this evening. We will ask for comments from each of our panelists to begin, and then there are a series of questions that we'll just be tossing to people throughout. This section will last about 40 minutes, and then we have the opportunity to ask questions from the floor and have a conversation in that direction. So let me introduce to you the folks that we have on our table right now. At the very end, we have Nelson McDonald, who is Cape Breton born and Halifax-based film producer who co-owns Grassfire Films. He is a longtime collaborator with Ashley McKenzie. Together, they have created 4 short films that they have screened at festivals, including the Toronto International Film Festival, the Vancouver International Film Festival, the Stockholm International Film Festival. Their first short, Rhondas Party, won CBC's Short Film Face-Off, and it was named to the Toronto International Film Festival's Top 10 Canadian Films of 2011. Their latest short, 4 Quarters, was shot in Sydney last year and is playing across Canada this fall. 4 Quarters won the award for Best Atlantic Canadian Short at the Atlantic Film Festival, and Nelson is currently producing Grassfire Films' first feature-length project, Train Whistle Does Not Blow. And if you were up in Glace Bay a couple of weeks ago, you would have seen them shooting. There was a lot of activity, so it's exciting to see that in a community. It's exciting to see that kind of activity. I'm going to go to I'm just going to go to Joella Folds, who is the co-founder and artistic director of the Celtic Colors International Festival. Her background includes work as a musician. She was a CBC journalist and host for many years. She was a social worker, an artist manager, and event coordinator. In 2012, Joella was honored with the Order of Canada for her work in the arts and culture sector, and in 2011, she received an honorary degree from Cape Breton University. She has also received the Industry Builder Award from the East Coast Music Association and has won several business and professional awards, and it's a pleasure to have you here this evening. Sheila Christie and Katie Krug. As a scholar and educator, Kate works to raise awareness about gender diversity and institutional challenges facing individuals whose gender does not read as normative. In particular, she has worked to educate individuals and organizations about the complex social politics surrounding public bathrooms and change rooms where staff and facility users police each other's gender. Sheila Christie also engages with gender, as in her recent Voices for Change project, which explored gendered violence in Cape Breton, and her work in applied theater focuses on staging socially relevant material in accessible spaces. Sheila Christie is particularly interested and experienced in adapting theatrical material to public spaces that emphasize the themes of the performance and engage audiences who might not otherwise witness theater. And we have Wesley Colford with us as well. And Wesley is, of course, no stranger to Cape Breton. He is a playwright and an actor, director, producer. He's originally from Sydney, but he is a graduate of Sheridan College's musical theater performance program. He studied classical acting at George Brown College. In May 2014, he returned home to the launch of the new Highland Arts Theatre on Bentinck Street. He is the artistic director there. And in the past year, he has overseen the progress of 12 major productions, including the Wachowski Brothers, A Christmas Carol, and Heart of Steel. He is also, that musical, by the way, ran through the summer at the Highland Arts Theatre and is going to be at the Next Stage Festival in Toronto this January. He recently took 2 hat productions to Halifax, where one won Best in Festival, and that was at the 25th Atlantic Fringe Festival. So Wesley's had quite a year. So the subject that we're looking at this evening has to do with how art and community intersect and interplay. This can result in change in a community. It can result in personal change, but it can also result in social change. So art, making art, is an important act in communities. What we want to do is understand the bigger picture, but to do that we have to ask some smaller questions. So what we'd like to do is begin by asking this question across the floor. In your experience, how have you seen art and community interact and inform each other? And actually, Joella, I'm going to start with you because that's a good place to start. Go ahead, Joella.
Thank you, Wendy. Well, I'm very fortunate. In fact, I consider myself extremely blessed to be able to work in so many communities throughout Cape Breton. I think we work in about 60 different communities and with about 120 different not-for-profit community groups. And that's all groups who are involved in some way in hosting an event for Celtic Colours, many of which are open and free to the public. And we also do 47 concerts, but there are 268 other events besides the concerts. So we need to remind people that it is very accessible to everyone. And I guess that message isn't out there far enough. In any case, what we find is that the culture, and whether that is visual art or music or dance, whatever aspect of the art that we are, and the communities are presenting, is something that brings the community together to celebrate and to express who they are. And it has been something that people in the tiniest little communities will come together around, which they have not come together around any other issues. They haven't come together around loss of their major industries sometimes. They haven't come together around problems that they might be facing as a community, but they will come together to celebrate who we are as people. And I think they can then get connected to their identity as people. So I find that art is absolutely central to people sort of discovering who they are and what they have in common with each other and how they can celebrate that. And we really have some great examples all over the island, not just through Celtic Colours, but I see that happening to a large extent in Sydney. I'm very excited about the way that we're seeing the growth of the whole creative sector in Cape Breton. I'm very honored to be sitting at this table with people like Wesley and filmmakers and writers and so on, because I think that's burgeoning. And this is a very special time for us in Cape Breton to connect as people in communities and do that through our art.
Nelson, I'm going to ask you how you see community and art interact and inform one another in your discipline.
Well, I think with filmmaking, often they don't. I see filmmakers often very carefully plan out their shoots. They don't have a lot of time. Everything's planned out like a military operation. That's actually where we take a lot of our terminology and a lot of our planning from, right? So you go into a community and you're in there for as little time as possible. And you make something and you get out and then you present it and all of a sudden this is the community on the screen in front of everybody. Or a lot of times people don't make films about communities at all or have any connection to community. I know when I moved to Halifax, I heard it said often by filmmakers, oh, well, my film's not set anywhere. It's a story that could take place anywhere. And they try to create this world where there was no identifiable objects in it, and it was kind of anywhere USA, you know? It felt like a Sears catalog or something, you know? And so I think with the films that Ashley and I made, the first couple of films, they were maybe inspired by where we were from in some weird abstract way, but they weren't set in Cape Breton and they weren't made here. But in the last couple of films we made, when we shot a film in North End Sydney, Four Quarters, which it's going to be our most successful short film. We shot it for next to no money. Wesley very kindly let us use his space. Another thing he did this year. And Ashley made the decision to move back to Cape Breton and write work here and make work here and use Cape Breton cast and use Cape Breton crew. And so all of a sudden these films are this idea that we had that if we made something really specific about a place, about where we're from, that we'd have something universal, seems to be working out. So I think it, you know, as filmmakers, like we want time in the places we go to, as much time as possible. We like to go there ahead of time. We like to spend time, get to know people. We shot some scenes the other day in New Waterford where we completely threw out the script for like 2 days, and we were like, this guy next door, Mark, is awesome. Let's use him in the film. And then there's this little kid down a couple of houses down. Let's use him. And we watched the footage back yesterday, and we were like, this is incredible, and this is way better than anything that we had on the page. So I think when you have time to spend in a community, which filmmakers often don't, it's been hugely beneficial for us, and it's opening a lot of doors.
Sheila, can you talk a little bit about how theater and community weave in and out of each other?
Sure. Well, it's a bit of an easier fit because theater creates community, just in terms of the people it brings together. So theater allows people who otherwise might not find a family to work together on a project that they feel collectively that they have some agency in, and that they're creating something of beauty, something of worth, and something of value, that then the audiences come and experience, and so they get to share and broaden their community out in that way. But it can be more than that as well. I mean, particularly the kind of theater that I work with and that I'm trying to develop more at the university is about ensuring that members of the community who don't usually have a voice get to speak through theater. So it's not just let's put on the same old plays we've always put on, but let's create plays that speak about our present moment, our present experience, the values, the challenges that we face. So there it becomes more about really allowing the community to hear all of its internal voices and not just let some people speak. Theater becomes a way of letting everybody speak.
Now, Heart of Steel, Wesley, was one of those plays that took a community story that was kind of in the ether. If you knew somebody, you might have heard a line or two about it, but you brought that whole narrative to life in that production.
I guess so. Is that the question? Or?
No, I want you. Well, I'll ask the question.
I got an easy
again.
one.
It's the same. No, it's the same question.
Okay.
But how did the community interact with your production? I'll be more specific that way.
Sure. I mean, I wish I got to sit in the middle of that community a little bit more, because it has been a very busy year, and even at performances of that show, I'd be running in the background and trying to do a million things. But what I could see was that people, the most amazing thing for me, I think, was seeing these women in particular, but men and women, who had worked at the steel plant, some during World War II, which is when the play was set. And at the end of every night, we'd ask anyone who worked at the steel plant to stand. And after having had an entirely separate experience ourselves creating this fiction based on research, and then suddenly seeing that the people here who were sharing the evening with us actually had lived those stories, it was a very harrowing and privileged position for me to be in. It was pretty marvelous. Hearing the stories of people in the cast who their grandmother worked there, or their aunt, or someone, I can't remember what the relation was, but they were the first woman who was married at the steel plant who was allowed to stay working, and that was in 1974. Yeah. So in order to, to be able to take some of those stories and put them in front of the broader public was extremely satisfying and a rewarding privilege for me, and for, I think, everyone that put it together. I think I can say that. That's certainly one of the benefits of theater, is being able to take things that are so specific. Like, I think with any story, you find the universality through the specificity. So if you have the luxury of being in a place as rich as Cape Breton, why not use those stories? Why would you do anything else?
Kate, in those comments, we're reminded that art can also reveal where the cracks are, or where the community doesn't necessarily connect very well. What is the responsibility of the artist in the community when you're looking at those difficult questions and trying to present that to a viewing public And knowing that you're bringing up some things that might not be very comfortable and might not speak very well of the community.
I think that if I can tweak that just a little, because I think that gets at the heart of both the art and the sociology of it, because I come at this as a sociologist as well as a member, as a social justice activist. And I think the thing that art can do is create a space where it is possible for us to look at the cracks and not perceive them necessarily as the very own cracks in our very own doors, walls, insides, etc., but give us an at least temporarily neutral space so that we can actually perceive the crack that we have been so accustomed to walking past every day that we've never noticed it before. And I think that is the thing, that is the way that art gives us an opportunity to look at our dark side, to look at to see, actually, to perceive our dark side when it's something, or the stuff that we have come so to take for granted that we've stopped noticing it.
And film can take us there. We're used to that language, and I'm thinking about Rhondas Party, and that it exposed this loneliness that people feel at the end of their lives. And it's a beautiful film, but there's a sadness. There's something in there that, what came out of Rhondas Party? What came out of that conversation, Nelson?
That project was a film that Ashley and I never would have ever come up with making on our own. It was a script written by a friend of ours, Christine Comeau, and when I read it, I was really surprised how much I liked it, and but I didn't feel like Ashley and I at the time were like 24 years old, and here we are making a film about dying in a nursing home. It was kind of felt like, how are we going to be truthful with this, you know? But we went and we volunteered at a nursing home in North End, Halifax, Northwood. We spent a few months there, got to know people there, got to see how things worked, got to see people coming out of an elevator on a gurney covered in you know, a shroud and taken out the door, and while everything else just went on at the nursing home, you know, and just moments like that and getting to know the folks there, we kind of worked ourselves up to giving ourselves permission to tell that story, and you know, trying to give it a little bit of a gritty angle that, I don't know, we always think like that just comes from like growing up when we did where we did in the Waterford, like like people are like, why is your movie set in a nursing home so dark and depressing? But you know, I don't know, it's just something about like, let's just try to make things like sharp edges, things that are just a little bit I don't know, hard, like make things hard for people to watch a little bit, you know. And so she took Rhonda's Party, which was really this sweet script, and she kind of roughed it up a bit. But, you know, based on our experiences being around people who are 90 years old, and, you know, like we had 4 women in that film who were 90 years old, so it was a special experience, but it was that experience in the nursing home really helped.
Sheila, there are sharp edges in art. It's sometimes difficult to avoid them. And sometimes communities, and we've seen that, I don't know if folks can remember some of those plays, maybe Joelle and I might be the only two who remember what happened in the 80s at CBU when they presented plays that people didn't like. There are probably those who remember those conversations, and they weren't pleasant. And but those sharp edges are there. Why do we need to give the artist space? Why does the community need to give the artist space in order to do that?
So you're not talking about physical space, you're talking about the permission to produce material like that. Because otherwise, you know, this gets back to what Nelson said about showing truth, being truthful to something, and what Kate was saying about allowing us to look at our dark sides. If we don't do that, then it's far too easy for us, I think, to continue to let the day-to-day reality absorb us, right? that one of the things, not the only thing, but one of the things that art can do is give us permission to set aside our bills, our groceries, our kid, and and focus on some of the bigger social problems or bigger human issues that do need to be examined in order for us to be proud to be human beings.
Then on the other hand, art does have a way of creating community, of making it stick together a little better in music in Cape Breton. Everybody understands how that works. Joella, talk to me about what your experience has been around that. We all know that traditional music is the way that people entertained one another, but the whole experience of Celtic Colors, those little community events, people putting on those turkey dinners and all that. Talk to me about what that means when you go to Boysdale or when you go to some little hall out in the middle of nowhere.
It's a lot more than music. It's a lot more than tradition. It's about culture in the broader sense, and so it means a lot to people to connect with each other as much as it does to connect with the event. And what we have found is that the catalyst may be the art exhibit, the catalyst may be the square dance, the concert, the workshop. That's kind of the catalyst. But the real impact that I do it for is about the community and about community development, because it allows people to, as we have just heard, put aside those sort of day-to-day, everyday, repetitive things in life and do something that is different and special. And even though these are, in most cases, we're encouraging communities to present and get involved in something that they know how to do. In other words, they've done that at other times of the year. Once they've gotten together, they want to do it better. They want to do it better because they feel proud to be part of a bigger picture, that it's not just Boysdale, it's not just, Christmas Island, it's all of Cape Breton, and we're proud of ourselves, and we're proud of our communities. And it doesn't seem to matter anymore that these communities may have lost so much, economically. It doesn't seem to be as important to them when they're connecting with that. And they're also, in our case, connecting with people from other places, and other places in Canada and other places in the world. And I think bringing people together from different places in the world is an important part of helping us to see our place in society, in a bigger society. And that the art, again, is the catalyst for doing that. And in this case, it's often music or dance or visual art. But these are kind of universal things that people all over the world have. And so what we've found is that our audiences locally and visitors, but particularly our local people, have much broader appreciation for what goes on in other places in the world and what kinds of music and cultural activities go on in other places in the world. And they're extremely excited about that. We meet with communities and bring them together all over the island, and bring different groups together. And you catch them telling stories constantly about their experiences with people from all over the world. And they're so proud of their little community, which, somebody else might say, well, gee, what do they have to be proud of? Well, they've got a lot to be proud of, and they love to talk about it. So I think that's an important role that the art is playing.
And Wesley, in addition to the productions that you present at Highland Arts Theatre, you also play host to a number of artists who are coming on that stage, whether they're engaged in some community organization and they've decided to present a show together, or maybe they're just giving expression to their voice for the first time, and we think of a lot of people. What is the value, and I want to talk about like the physical space, what is the value of having a physical space to do that for the broader community?
I think that's a huge part of the success we've had, the fact that we can be downtown, very central, very accessible in a physical sense. I think that's that's something that every community needs, and I think despite the tremendous talent and the tremendous efforts of many, many people over many, many years, that physical space has been lacking in Sydney for a number of years. And that's certainly what I've seen, where suddenly, as more and more things happening, more and more other things have the permission to happen, perhaps, or have the opportunity to happen, because it's so much a part of the ecology. I mean, when we did, I think the first time we did was when we did A Christmas Carol, we brought out the bell tower. So people would be walking down Sydney and Charlotte Street and hearing Christmas carols from the bell tower. And I think that's a great metaphor for just these things going out, even like our posters, taking visual artwork, mirroring that with our theatrical productions, with music, with artists, with all of these circle of talents. It's like, oh, there's an expression. It's like water breeds water, or something. I don't know, something like that. Something breeds something. And the more that this is happening, rabbits. I don't know. There's something in there. But I think the more that we're able to allow these things to flourish, the more exposure they have, and then the more people will come out of the woodworks. Some of the most talented people I've worked with this year, it was their first time on stage and their first time in a play, and that's incredible to me to get to see that happen, because it never could have if there wasn't a bit of infrastructure, and then they, for whatever reason, decided to come and say yes. So that's very exciting.
But Sheila, what happens to a community? Let's flip this over. What happens to a community when it doesn't have control of its own space? When it's corporatized, or it's just beyond the reach of the first timer, or you can only draw 30 people, to a show. I mean, there's a certain economic, there's a business piece to this as well, or at least a break-even piece. What happens when communities don't have that?
Yeah, well, I mean, a perfect example would be Cape Stage Company, which struggled to find spaces to perform in, and they were always tiny spaces, so you couldn't bring in a lot of audience. And they did reasonably well for as long as they could run, but it just wore them out. Whereas having a space allows for that, for some of that work to be done. So there's sort of two parts to that. One is that there's the energy it takes to create space if the space doesn't already exist, to reclaim space from corporate space, or from sort of space that's been closed off by administration or government, saying, no, this isn't performable space, this isn't artistic space. So there's the effort to reclaim that space, and then there's money. And as soon as the space costs money, the art costs money, and that limits the access to that space. So it makes art itself corporate, and reduces the ability it has to bring people together. The people who are most vulnerable, the people who most need to engage and participate in art, are the people who don't have the money, right? They barely have enough money to make bus fare, never mind take a cab out to CBU to go see a play. It just doesn't work that way. So you need to have local, accessible, low cost or free space to allow art to exist in order to have all of the benefits of art that then flow from that.
There's a never-ending conversation in Canada about film and access to screens and access to capital. And if film is the language of our generation, or one of the languages of our generation, where are we in Cape Breton in terms of being able to speak that language, Nelson?
Well, it's definitely a complicated conversation to have, I guess. I mean, we had the Cape Breton Island Film Series for a lot of years, and which we were really lucky to have. And that had a huge impact on Ashley and I, and getting to see films from around the world, and a lot of Canadian stuff too, that we wouldn't get to see otherwise. Cineplex, yeah, I mean, Ashley and I don't have any aspirations to have the feature film we're making right now play at Cineplex. As far as it's the Walmart of movie theaters. So
We just got a new projector, just
wonderful.
saying. Throw that out there.
How much?
We'll talk.
No, in Canada, right across the country, there's not a lot of independent cinemas left, so there's not a lot of options in that way. I mean, I have conversations with friends from Montreal and Toronto, and I have a filmmaker friend who's from Montreal, and she is one of the most amazing filmmakers, and she is going to be, like, she's working on her first feature right now as well, and she's going to be massive. But she doesn't let her films play online, and she doesn't let her films play on small screens. She only wants her films seen on big screens, and that's really admirable. But and she was kind of like, why do you have your films playing on airplanes and these sorts of things? And I'm like, well, where I'm from, there's no big screen, so nobody's ever going to see the films if we don't put them online or put them on airplanes and get people to see them. So for us right now, where we're at, we don't really aspire to many big screens. The reality is that if we want Cape Bretoners to see our films, or people in small towns right across this country, this is going to have to be, at home. That's where they're going to see it, and that's fine by me.
And film is a powerful tool to enlighten people. I'm thinking of Al Gore's An Inconvenient Truth and how suddenly the light switch went on globally about the issue of global warming. And that was a work that took a position, a very identifiable, definable position. What is the role of the artist to take positions in the civic discussion? Like, we're in the middle of an election. We have a lot of things going on in our community, a lot of points in the map. Should the artist be that directed? You're nodding, Kate.
Yeah.
And why? Why is it necessary for the artist to comment on specific things?
Often because the artist has a venue for their voice. And if you do not speak when you have the opportunity and the venue for your voice, then we can't have change. We're not likely to have change. So not only do we need to nurture the spaces so that the voices are there from one generation to the next, it's also incumbent on those of us who have the possibility and the venue for our voice to speak these truths and speak them wherever and whenever.
And what if it's, talk to me about the safety of that, Sheila, because there's also, there's a balancing act there, isn't there? There's times when communities are ready to hear things and times when they're not. And if you say something, they may never listen to you again. That's one of the risks that an artist takes.
Yeah, well, and you have to figure out the right balance for the message that you have to give and the audience that's going to hear it. So, for example, with the plays that we're doing in Lumiere, we're not coming out and saying, okay, you need to accept these grown adults who have decided or who feel very strongly that their gender is not what their body presents, because that's still very difficult for people to hear. So instead, we're giving it to them in children, because it's harder to get angry at children, unless they're your own. So I think that Kate's right, that you have to speak the truth, but you have to think about how to speak the truth in a way that it will be heard. And some of that's about the safety of the artist. I think that when you're thinking about safety, you have to think about in what ways is the artist vulnerable? So I'm thinking about the gentleman who got fired because of his Harper parody song, right? But he is a person who already has some safety, security, and privilege, and a great deal of support for his actions. Whereas, some of the people who've chosen to be involved in our project are trans teens. Mm-hmm. They are very vulnerable. And in inviting them to be part of the project, we've asked them to be self-selected, to know that this is something that they're willing to do. And we have talked about how to remain safe while in the project. So, the answer depends on the person giving the message, the artist, and the context.
But you're also trusting your community a little bit. Like, you don't expose your children to that unless you have faith that your community is probably going to protect them at some level.
We know that the people who are coming out to Lumiere are our people. Mm-hmm. So we're prepared for, we're doing our shows 3 times, and the last set is at, I think, 10:30 and 11. Those aren't going to be kids coming to those audiences. most of the people coming to those audiences will probably have had a little bit to drink, right? So those are our most unsafe audiences. So we, for the most part, we trust, and we know that Lumiere itself has facilities in place to protect the artists. So we've got levels of security that we're building in to protect our artists.
Now, some genres can challenge and can talk about things. Theater is one that can do that. Music has historically, if you think about where music has been in the last 50 years, sometimes it's challenged the status quo, and sometimes it hasn't. And the traditional world it's a difficult place to challenge the status quo. Some people have done it. I mean, Ashley McIsaac is a perfect example of somebody who absolutely challenged the status quo. But Joella, you talk to these artists. Is that even on their radar to ask the question, why?
Oh, sure, absolutely.
And how do they answer it? How does a contemporary fiddle player or a contemporary singer answer why?
I reflect back to a conversation I had with Ashley when he was 17, and he was driving with me to Halifax or back from Halifax. I can't remember which it was, and it was agony for him to actually make this choice and be terrified that the traditional community, who he just had so much respect for and was so deeply engaged with in his entire life, that they may reject what he had decided to do with his music. And it was a great conversation, because I think he wanted an independent adult to bounce it off of, right? And I had this mother figure for all these young musicians over the years, all types of, not just traditional musicians, certainly. And by the end of the conversation, he knew that he had to do this. And I think I was really assuring him that there will always be people who criticize it, but the people who really know how important what he's doing is will be there for him, and it's proven to be true. Sure, they may have said, you know, he went through his bad boy phase very intentionally, right? That was a way to promote his career and a way to get it out of his system. But he never lost that connection with the traditional aspects of the music that he values so much. And he can go either direction now and continues to do that with his music. And so he actually has been a source of inspiration for a lot of young musicians who either want to delve a little bit into the traditional music or take that and go somewhere else with it. You kind of need the support of somebody who's done it and done it successfully, and he has a great ability to nurture other people and encourage them, and so he's a wonderful example of that. I think that the Gaelic community has had the same thing to deal with as well, because they are so deeply rooted through language and songs and everything else, and there are still people who refuse to vary outside of that at all. But the people that have done it are encouraging to the young people who are wanting to do more of it. So it's a matter of, you know, people finding their models that they can gain support from, and figuring out where that support is. And we all need to be there for them.
This brings us to another question, and it's sort of one of the last ones on our list, but it has to do with the business of funding. And so often, when we say, in Cape Breton, when we say art, the word tourism is about 1.5 inches away from it, that somehow we make art so the tourists will come. And it must be very, very difficult for an artist to say, no, there are other reasons, and there's, everybody's nodding now, because I think everybody's been in that conversation. Wesley, are you comfortable in sharing how you square that one?
Sure, I can attempt. I mean, I think that's a big, I think it's a big thing that is definitely discussed a lot in Cape Breton, and I think because we have so much to offer, it's a very appealing sort of savior to think that, you know, all these people are going to come in on these cruise ships, and we're going to have a new downtown, and everything's going to be nice and shiny and like Charlottetown, and ultimately that doesn't seem to be the case, not in the way that people imagine anyway. And I think ultimately, I mean, this is a huge question, and I think a lot of people, everyone here in this room probably has an opinion on that. But I think one of the reasons is that that's not what we want to be, and that's certainly not what I want to be. I think as Cape Bretoners, we're much more than a commodity or a trinket. I know one of the things that brought me back when Highland Arts was starting, and before we had any idea what the potential would be, was the fact that we thought we had this deal with cruise ships lined up, where we were going to have a show running through the summer, and we are going to do 3 shows a day, and it was going to be great and employ all these people, and it was wonderful. And after coming back and very quickly finding out that that wasn't the case, the reason I stayed and the reason we've been doing so much this year is because of the people here, and in all of our programming, very, very little, if anything, was, since that point, about a year and a half ago, very, very little of it was made with the intention of what can we do for tourists. Really, it's all been about what does Cape Breton need, what do Cape Bretoners need to see, because I don't think we think about ourselves enough, as much as we also always think about ourselves. I think we have an idea of Cape Bretoners, but we don't actually do the things that we need to do sometimes, and so that's certainly been my mission. We had the summer series. It was 4 shows that ran for 8 weeks consecutively, employed over 70 Cape Bretoners, and all of which were stories by Cape Bretoners. And some of them had tourist appeal. I hope that we had people visiting that enjoyed themselves. But our theme for the whole summer was for Cape Breton, or by Cape Breton, for Cape Breton. And ultimately, that's what interests me. My bank account may continue to scold me for that decision.
No.
But I mean, I don't know that it's there. And we could spend endless resources courting that and marketing and, putting up TV spots in New Brunswick or whatever, or across Canada. But ultimately, if we're going to work this hard at things that are going to consume all of our being for absolutely no monetary or physical reward, I think it has to be for the people we care about and people in our community. So that's what I think.
And you and I have both been in situations, I'm sure, Joella, where we have said to government, no.
Yeah,
Absolutely not.
I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, actually, the irony of it all, and certainly I can speak very strongly about this because there's been so much pressure on our organization to prove itself based on tourism.
Right.
But in fact, it's not tourism that helps us with funding. It's usually culture. And our mission remains, we do a festival for ourselves. And if people from other places like it, that's great. That's great. They're welcome to come, but we don't do it for them. Because if we did it for them, we'd be on the wrong track. We would be doing it wrong. It would not be authentic. We would be, looking at what other places and other people do. I mean, it has to be for us first. And so what you're doing is dead on right. Don't ever let them tell you otherwise. The other approach is doomed to failure, and I credit the success that we've had with the fact that we do it for ourselves first, and we welcome other people if they want to come.
Because otherwise you're guessing at what other people want, which is a first mistake, and then ultimately you don't enjoy it. The people who are here who have the potential to enjoy it don't enjoy it. This whole year, I think I've said this to you, Wendy, on radio before. We have 0 government funding for the Highland Arts Theatre. If there's any tourist percentage of audience, that's very small. And so everything we've done has only been possible because the faith and the generosity of people from Cape Breton, which is tons and tons of work on the production side that's mostly volunteer, and then the audiences that come and take part in that. So I think otherwise, what are you doing? I think that's the only thing you can do.
And I get, here in the province of Nova Scotia, we have certainly heard filmmakers tell government, you don't understand what we do. You don't even understand your own tax code. Getting in, but there, film got in with government, and there were conversations about whether that was wise in the mid 1980s and certainly into the 90s when those structures were coming up. So when you get in with government, there are risks, aren't there, Nelson? I mean, when you start going for that funding, then the business of the artist changes a little bit, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there's some issues in Nova Scotia you might have heard of recently. I'm only recently allowed back into the Nova Scotia legislature. But I don't know, like Ashley and I, like, our movies, like, this is kind of my mantra right now. Our films are not economic development projects. Like, it's the last thing on my mind when I go to make a film. I'm not in it for business. Like, I'm not in it to create jobs. I'm in it to tell a story and tell the best story we can, tell an authentic story. We want this we make Nova Scotian stories, and we want them to play around the world and represent Nova Scotia at the best film festivals in the world. And that's where we're coming from. Now, mind you, right now we're spending a lot of money at No Quarter Deli, and we're spending a lot of money at the Hearthstone Inn, and we're spending a lot of money at discount car rentals down the street. But I'm not doing this for economic development purposes. And when you, like, our whole model for the film we're making now is basically, like, even making a film in Cape Breton, from a financial perspective, makes 0 sense. And usually what's done, and there's a film doing that right now, actually, it's set in Cape Breton, but they come here for 2 days, and they shoot some scenic stuff, and then they go back to Halifax, or back to Toronto, or back to wherever, and they shoot the rest of it, you know, in somebody's house, in some studio, or whatever. So, I don't know, like, yeah, it's not an economic development project. Like, and if this film is successful, it's going to be successful because of how, like you said, back to the specific, it's like how specific we made it of this place, that we have Cape Bretoners in the film. Like, we had this decision to make. We've worked with actors from Vancouver, Toronto, Montreal, all over the place. But we were making a film at Cape Breton about Cape Bretoners, and we're looking at it and we're like, you know what, we got to go with the girl from Big Pond. Like, we did, you know, and it was the right decision, and it's worked out great, you know. And it's just, if we had funders breathing down our necks, like, our budget level is just at the right spot right now where no one cares about us. Right? The government, nobody cares. They just kind of let us slide through at this budget level. Nobody's looking, and it's perfect. And if the film's successful, it's because we were able to slide through and do things our own way and not have to pander to, you know, all of these check boxes on the paperwork. It's really worked out well.
We've been talking about what the artist does for the community, and I have one final question for this end of the table, and it has to do with, and we've talked about how art impacts community and how it helps the community tell its own stories and how it connects people to one another. But what does the community need to do for the artist? We haven't talked about that direction yet. And Sheila, I wonder if you had any thoughts about that.
Send your children to the university. Oh, did I say that out loud? But no, I mean, first and foremost, I think it's to get out and see things and support things. And we're preaching to the crowd because you guys are here. But a lot of people, I think, you know, they're like, oh yeah, that sounds really cool, but Netflix, man, Netflix. And I get that. I get home at the end of the day and I'm exhausted too, and the only reason I go back out is because I'm stage managing, and if I'm not there, the show doesn't happen. So I think that part of it is just that commitment, that yeah, okay, you know what, it's worth dragging myself back out of the house. And then, you know, I said it facetiously, but I think also supporting and celebrating people who are interested in artistic careers or artistic hobbies. I think an awful lot of people give up on their dreams or give up on the things that they love that might be artistic because they believe that it's shameful in some way, that they're going to be looked down on because they're not going after the money or the security or the stability. To tell people, all people, children, young adults, seniors, that sometimes doing something because it makes you happy is okay, and that maybe that should be celebrated too. So I think that's something that the community can do.
And does the community have a role to play? And this might be the rose-colored glasses question, but I mean, can communities make it safer for artists? Are there certain places where artists feel that they can say what they have to say more than maybe in other spots? Do you have any thoughts on that, Kate? Are there places that are just more open to those jagged edges?
Well, I don't actually know. Because I can imagine there are some spaces. I've been a social justice activist for over 30 years, and so I've been pointy and jagged in lots of places that it was dangerous to be pointy and jagged in, and sometimes as an artist and sometimes not. And I've walked into some spaces where I thought they're gonna hurt me bad, but they didn't. I mean, I think that the thing that there's a symbiotic relationship here. On the one hand, the artist has to be willing to risk being vulnerable. And on the other hand, the community has to risk being there with its heart. And I think that there's a really interesting interplay that happens, that when you go out there with your vulnerability, oftentimes it's much harder to not come back with heart, because you can see the when the community sees the vulnerability, they have really not a whole lot of choice except to respond with a little teeny tiny bit of heart, because it's there. So there's this really interesting dynamic, I think, that gets set up.
It's 8:30, and just keeping track of the time, and I know that that there might be a few questions from the floor. So does anybody have anything that they would like to ask? Elise has a microphone, or any maybe observations that you have about what you've been hearing this evening?
Test.
I just wanted to follow up on what Nelson and Wesley were saying about the ability to screen movies, which I know a little bit about. As the film series kind of dwindled, I racked my brain about what was going on and what other model could make it work. And I believe there is a model that could work. Unfortunately, I don't think it's your theater, because that is way too big a space. What's needed here is a theater with 60 seats and a DCP projector, which when Empire installed them, they were $100,000 a unit. When a year later they were $50,000 a unit. I don't know what they are now, but I think they are gradually coming within range. Maybe you want one end of the room has the theater, and the other end of the room has a coffee shop or a pub or something like that. It needs a 24-year-old, not a 70-year-old. But I think that I wish to God we could convince a development agency to help some entrepreneur buy that piece of equipment, because I think it would be incredibly useful here, even to the point of during the day, you could have high school kids come in and play video games and car racing on it. There's a multitude of ways it could be used. At midnight, it should show zombie movies, whatever. But if that were here, and if it were creatively used to get revenue in all kinds of ways, it would provide a huge market for your movies, for your precious friend who thinks it's wrong to watch on small screens, who I passionately disagree with, but there is something about a big screen. And the best brochure we ever put out for the film series was all black, and it had the following on it: gather with friends in a big room, turn out the lights, do something thrilling. And that, to me, is the essence of and it doesn't have to be that big a room.
Does anyone else have anything they'd like to share or thoughts that they'd like to, or questions that they have for any of the folks? There's one over here.
Hello. I'd like to hear, a number of ideas about a community offering the different levels of art, okay, from beginner to professional. And as a visual artist, as a creative person in Cape Breton, I grew up missing that, or lacking that progression of art. Because you kind of always saw the mid-range. You didn't see the highly polished, and you didn't see the struggling, just starting, and I think that's really important for people to see, that you don't just start art and it's wonderful. That like anything else, especially music or anything, it takes practice, it takes growth, it takes mentorship, and I'd love to see those spaces really flourish within Sydney.
And actually, I'm going to start, because music has in the past had that kind of sort of farm team build-up system.
I think this is one place where other forms of art could actually look at what happens with our traditional music, although we're at risk of losing it, but hopefully that's not going to happen. There's some great new programs starting, but they have to be started at an early age, and you actually have to put them out there so that there's a bit of a risk. You have to develop the ability to manage putting it out there, whether it's visual art or making of a video or whatever it is. So they do it in the music system, and they do it with music and dance, and they put the kids on the stage at the community Kaylee, or whatever they happen to call that concert that raises money for something or other, and the kids they're really bad the first few times they're up there. And nobody ever gives them, they encourage them in the positive things, and they don't really, there's some kids that are never going to be outgoing on the stage, but if they learn to play better, then they clap harder the next time. And that's all you do, you just reward them. So yeah, I think that one thing the community could be doing is pushing for exactly the kind of thing you're talking about, which is a lot more programs where kids can experiment with theater, where kids can experiment with visual arts, and where they can actually put it out there with the public. We don't get enough of it in the school system. We're going to have to be doing what some of you are doing, which is providing it in the community, but I would like to see us challenge our municipalities and our school systems to do a lot more of that, for exactly the reason you're talking about.
Go ahead.
I just want to sort of jump in, and from the theater side, one of the things that I've noticed, we have class acts drama, and we have
Dangerous Dream, or the costume capers.
Thank you. There are places, the youth festival, some of it's terrible. Some of it's delightfully awful. Somewhat. But the problem is that it's still limited to the people. It's about cost. It's about access. Cost. The youth theater festival is out at CBU. How do you get there? Anyone who's involved in dance and music lessons in the theater schools, they have the money to pay to get involved in them. And it's precisely the problem where it's not in the schools, right? Now you can only engage in art if you already have capital. And that starts that cycle. So I don't know how to solve that. March on the schools.
You're a visual artist. Can you talk to me about does anybody here, I'm going to come to you in a sec, I know you have a question, but is there anybody here in the visual arts community who can tell us where that comes from? We know what the path is in dance, we know what it is in music. Can you tell us that? Where is it here?
Oh, I don't know about here, but the answer is artist-run centers. Those are huge. They provide workshops for youth, and then they display the stuff for multitudes of different mediums. So in Sackville, New Brunswick, Strutt's Gallery, Fawcett Media Arts Center, They do a ton. They do camps for videography, photography in the summer for youth, and they don't need equipment. The equipment is provided, and that's a huge thing. And the second thing we need is makerspace, a library with equipment that people can access. We kind of have it with CAP, but we need more. CAP space is great. I want to give them a shout out because they have equipment that you can go and get as a member of the public, professional stuff. It's awesome. Just go there and meet with Rachel. She's great.
Do you, and Allison, do you want to?
I'm just curious about what pathways to funding are, because we can have artist-run centers, that would be really great, but there is something about, and Sheila touched on this a little bit, like, it costs money to do these things, but then for some reason artists don't get paid in the end. Like, when you become an artist, all of a sudden you're not getting paid. Celtic Colors does a really good job of paying artists. Lumiere pays their artists, but I feel like there's a missing link here, and I don't know if it's like government funding or private sector funding, but there needs to be a way that we can fund artist-run centers, we can pay our artists, but how do we imagine that so that it's reality?
Artists need to have confidence in themselves and demand that they get paid and stop working for free.
Yeah.
Even if it's like $10, it's better than nothing.
Well, and I think alongside that, I mean, so part of it is confidence, but part of it's also, I hate to be saying this, business acumen, right? One of the things that we still do in our society is go, okay, well, if you're going to do art, here are all your art techniques, and then we'll just leave you there. But the reality is that you have to live in the world and you need to make money, so you need to know, how do you apply for grants? How do you pay taxes? How do you price your materials? What's a fair rental cost for space? I think if artists have the enterprise skills that go along with the arts that they do, they're at least in a better position to do things like buy those materials, start, like the artist-run centers, the reason they do that is because there's all sorts of grant funding for anything that is educational and youth-oriented. So if you want to be a professional artist, part of the way you do that is by making space for youth, right? But you need to know that, and then you need to know how to write the grant in such a way that you'll be funded. And we don't train anyone in that.
But I want to come back to a question. You know, I was just a couple weekends ago having coffee with a fellow who has worked as a bass player in a band, Terry Clark's band and Michelle Wright's band in Nashville. He tours 7 or 8 months out of the year, and he said he's making as much money now as he did 18 years ago, because the value of what he's doing, because of the technology and because of the value that the community places on that, has actually declined, in real dollars has declined. And the question we're asking about the role of community in art. And I mean, does community need to understand that this has a value? Do you think that there is, or how do you persuade community that there is a value in art, and that they sometimes you can't ask people to do something for nothing or to do it for the swag, which is what you often hear. I'll give you swag if you'll, how are you going to feed your family on that? I've never understood that. But anyway.
I think, and back to the business thing, I think that I am constantly convincing people that I'm not just like a flaky artist who just like wakes up at noon and when the muse hits me, I work, you know, like it's a business. You sit down, because everyone's like, how do you write every day? I'm like, you treat it like a job. It's a job. And and that business side, just educating people. And the more you talk to people one-on-one, then that's the wonderful thing about Cape Breton is like word of mouth really travels quite quickly, and good and bad, but I find it's usually good. And just convincing people that an artist is a business too. Like it sounds really unromantic, but it's the way it is, you know. So
One more, yeah, go ahead.
6 of the 7 board members of Lumiere are here tonight, and so I'm curious about, we got such a great cross-section from the artist community in Cape Breton. You know, the festival's quite young still, for going on 5 years. Obviously, Joella has quite a lot of experience with running festivals. But even from everyone else's perspective, just as somebody integrated into the art community in Cape Breton, and you see something like Lumiere and how it's been over the last 4 years, and sort of, maybe if you want to just share your comments about what you would like to see Lumiere become into the future. So it'd be, you know, we hope that this becomes something that's here forever. And although I'm not an artist, we have artists on the board. We have a very strong focus that this is a festival that's not going to become something that you'll see food trucks lined down Charlotte Street, and we don't want to distract from the art, so that's sort of our continued focus. But I was curious to hear your thoughts and comments on into the future for Lumiere, and even in terms of, is it, what you think about the size of it, or if it is something that expands or shrinks, or project-wise, whatever you'd like to share.
Joelle, you want to start with that?
I think Lumiere is doing all the right things. I think it's absolutely wonderful, and it doesn't really matter whether it grows or not, because it's got an awful lot of people out there thinking about art in a way that they never did before. And it's the other beauty of what Lumiere is doing is that it brings community together and brings community and art together, and that's what we're really talking about here tonight. In a way that very few things can do that, and there's a magic about that downtown street the night of Lumiere, and people don't want to miss it. And they don't want to miss the art they're seeing there, but they also don't want to miss talking to other people who are there seeing art. And did you see the such and such? Oh, you got to go see that. It's down there. And you've got to go. And, I think it will become something that is always here, as long as the community, I think you're going to need more support than you've got. I don't think you can continue to do this on a volunteer basis forever. I think you have to have somebody who can get up every morning and work on it, because I can't imagine how all you guys are doing this volunteer. I cannot even imagine. Anyway, I think you're doing all the right things, and growing gradually, if you are going to grow, is the way to do it.
I just want to say, I think one of the strongest components of Lumiere is the fact that there is this integration with sort of the commercial sector and the the secular sector, the non-artistic world, where all of the things that have been discussed tonight, just the exposure and showing people what is possible and new ways to think of things, I think that's what Lumiere seems to be about. I mean, I'm so excited on Saturday to see everything, but I think it's about education. I think finding, I think you guys are leading the way with that. I think it's terrific.
I think if there was anything that I would like to see, and to be honest, I don't know if there's already movement in this, but it would be more active engagement with the public schools. Getting them to create projects, whether they're collaborative projects for the whole school board or each school presenting a project of some kind. But in every school, there are kids who have artistic interests and who really do have things to say. And I think that, thinking about what was said earlier about making sure that we see art developing at all levels, to be able to make space for those kids and say, hey, this is for you too. It's not just for the grown-ups. I know that there are kids who participate in Lumiere and there are kids' projects, but I think that in the future, that could be a granting opportunity, but also an opportunity to make sure that you're involving the future generations of artists and showing the potential there.
We wanted to make sure that we had the evening in a time that wasn't exhausting folks, and I know that Elise has a couple of comments. So if there's nothing else, I'd like to say thank you, and thank you to the folks who have been on the panel, and thank you for your great questions, and I'm going to bring Elise back to the podium.